As a historian, I want to emphasize the tremendous challenges that are faced in telling the story of Latinos in the Central Valley. And I won't mention all of the variations of terms that we will use in this exhibit. It will be shown to you when you arrive. But what I want to emphasize are two major challenges that we face. One is that this story of Latinos in the Central Valley has to be understood as being very different from that of almost all the other immigrant groups that have come to the United States. On the one hand, there were already people who were Spanish-speaking people who claimed to be Spaniards, although that is a complicated category, or Mexicans. And in this respect, they were already here in a manner of speaking, not to mention the migratory flows that come afterwards. And that goes to the second challenge, because of this continuous migration, particularly from Mexico, and then much later from other parts of Latin America, that means that we need to understand the historical context at the point of arrival for those newcomers, overwhelmingly from Mexico, and on the other hand, the historical context in Mexico itself, and then later in El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and so on, when people arrived here. We can't just assume that the Mexicans who came, for example, at the end of the 19th century are in a sense the same kind of Mexicans who arrived in the 2000s. Secondly, in terms of telling that story, because of this continuous migration, we have generational differences. And those generational changes are compounded by the arrival of the newcomers. In other words, the tremendous diversity among people of Latin American origin, whether they're Mexican or whether they're Salvadoreños, Hondureños, whatever the case may be. And related to that is the diverse nature of the people who do come. Nuevo León, Chihuahua are very different from Campeche, Tabasco, not to mention Oaxaca, for example. So there is that differentiation. And finally, the migration from other parts of the United States to the Central Valley, from people from Texas, Arizona, Nuevo Mexico, and so on, who arrive as part of an internal migration to the state of California, to the Central Valley, particularly and most specifically to places like Tulare and Kings County. So join me on this incredible journey, these caminos from various parts of Latin America, especially Mexico, to Tulare and Kings County. Bienvenidos, welcome. I want to take this opportunity to talk about the first chapter of this exhibit. It is an incredibly important, complex chapter to discuss. The first Spanish missionaries arrived in Alta California, as it was called at that time, in 1769, and in 1821, what is considered to be the Spanish era of California ends. But in this period of time, there are 3 points we need to consider. First, why did Spain take so long to get to Alta California, given the fact that in 1519, Hernán Cortés had entered what we now call Mexico? So what took so long? What is going on that Spain, in a sense, takes 250 years to get to Alta California? Secondly, in terms of this period of time, we need to understand that overwhelmingly this period is associated with the so-called missions along the coast of California. And very little attention is given to the Central Valley. And the attention that is given is primarily about explorations and expeditions into the valley that are linked to the concerns of the missions themselves. But the third point is that all during that period, from 1769 to 1821, a tragedy is unfolding, not only in the coast, but also affects the Central Valley. And that is the decimation of the Native American population of Alta California, and in this case, the Central Valley. It is estimated that roughly 300,000 natives were in what we now call California. By the end of the so-called Spanish period in 1821, there are only roughly 150,000 left. And as a consequence then, this is one of the legacies of that period. But there are many others, not to mention the introduction of various animals and plants and so on. That also leads to another change, and that is the ecological consequences of this period for the Central Valley. As you will see in this first chapter of the exhibit, all three of these points are addressed, and I trust that you will find them important to understanding the next chapter of the Latino population of the Central Valley.